Welcome to the Navigating Disability podcast with Jen Abbott and Kate Reid, the podcast that highlights the experiences, challenges, and triumphs of living with disability. Today, we're joined by Deb Quelch, a passionate advocate and consultant with extensive experience in the disability sector. Deb brings a unique perspective, not only from her professional work, but also through her lived experience with disability. Having dedicated her career to promoting accessibility and inclusion, Deb is committed to empowering individuals and breaking down barriers. In this episode, we'll discuss her personal journey, the impact of her advocacy, and her vision for a more inclusive world. Join us for a powerful and inspiring conversation with Deb Quelch. Welcome, Deb. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Jen, for having me. It's an absolute pleasure and excitable joy to be here this morning. Thank you.
Likewise. Now, I've known you for a little while, Deb.
Yep.
In fact, it's actually quite a while now, considering I think the boys were at kinder together.
Right.
Tell us about your journey with disability. How did it start, and how have you got to where you are today?
Okay. I'll go way back. So I grew up in the Redlands and I'm the eldest of three. Mum and dad, really involved parents. Dad was a chippy. He's still around, just retired. Mum, stay-at-home mum. And it was me, my sister, and then my brother. And Mike was born and diagnosed in his early years with an intellectual impairment. I've just watched Mum and Dad through the years advocating through the 80s and 90s. In the education space. And I went into teaching straight out of high school. I struggled at school myself, like not too much academically, but just constant overwhelm of feeling, I remember primary school feeling completely lost. High school, if I didn't have a peer with me to cling on to, completely lost. University, I remember being on my own for the first time. I had no clue. And I just remember watching everyone around me appearing to know what was going on. And every step of the way as I reflect, I feel like I've lived life where, did I miss that email? Did I miss that meeting? People just seem to know what's going on. And I'm like 10 steps behind. I've always felt like I was self-centered, slow, lazy, disorganized, always late.
Just stop you there for a second, Deb. Do you think that was because of what you really thought, or because what people had said to you?
Bit of both. I'm a pretty severe self-critic. And in early years of teaching, I think we were taught to be very reflective, self-reflective, and that's become a part of my person now. So I guess fast forward to working in classrooms, working through the late 90s, early 2000s in classrooms in the integration space. And then I'll jump back to watching my parents just work super hard in their time to advocate for spaces for my brother. And then to have kids. I took time off. I left teaching to have the kids, and then I also became a stepmom at the time, so that was a bit overwhelming. And I'm watching my two boys go through their journey, particularly the elder one, the first one, James. He, again, just had that feeling of, why are other mums keeping up? Why do other mums not? Why do they look like they can just do things so easily? And I would go to like the child health nurse or GP and say, there's just something it's either me or the kid. Like, either I'm really broken and just can't do this and was never made to do this, or there's something going on. And a lot of we'll wait and see, or that's what 3-year-olds do, or some babies don't sleep, or some babies don't eat well. And that was pretty rough. So on the other side of that, just always watching this space, feeling like, why do I feel like I always have to work super hard, super fast, super intense, just to try and keep up baseline level with everything within myself and then within family life as well. And I remember the day when I was sitting, it was after COVID lockdown, and we're trying to get back to school and doing a slow integration back into the classroom with my younger son. He was in year 1 at the time, with this super beautiful, lovely, accommodating, just lived and breathed universal design. And I was sitting outside her classroom with my son, who was highly anxious, looking through the windows to the other block to another mum who was sitting with her daughter, who was having the same, similar but different re-entry issues, with another gorgeous teacher who was accommodating, beautiful, understanding. These teachers were moving like so much of their worlds to try and support our kids. And I'm like, why are we still sitting outside? Why is my kid not being included? And at the same time, I was working in a school where I was getting in a distance education setting where, in the time I was there, my clientele, my student cohort had changed from families who had selected to educate their kids at home, but wanted to do so in a distance education framework. So people who were in performing arts or had a particular faith that wasn't accommodated in schools in their area. Those families started to be outnumbered by families who had tried to have their students or their children enrolled in schools, and had tried different schools, different types of schools. And the kids and the mums, particular, and sometimes dads, mostly mums, were completely burnt out. So I'm sitting in this space watching my own children struggle, watching other families struggle, trying to understand, why is this happening? And so my brain, even though it can be a little bit slow sometimes to work out what's going on, it's really good at noticing patterns, and it's really good at going, well, I'm not accepting that. And so I'd ask questions, and then I'd get with the other mum sitting across the other room and go, why is this not happening? There's so many boxes being ticked in terms of supports in place. What is it with our kids? And so I guess having that lived experience, and then sitting in a space where things were meant to be a certain way and it just wasn't. And I started asking questions, and I didn't like the answers that I was getting. So I went back to study to find out more. And I wanted to have my mum observations, my anecdotal, casual conversations, my noticings. I wanted to have them deeply validated and justified by academic literature. I wanted to have some power and punch behind what I was seeing, and I wanted to understand it better. And then I wanted to challenge it, because it's not okay. So that's my story around how I ended up, I guess, sitting in a space where I want to support families and I want to advocate for children or people with not just disabilities, but who are very human and very experience very normal and real parts of the human experience and what it is to be human. It's just not the mainstream in the middle of and what's being catered for typically.
Can I ask, Deb, you mentioned that there was a time, I think when James was 3, and you said it was either me or it was him, or something's going wrong. I can totally relate to that, because I have been there, and I remember saying, either Xavier's going to survive or I'm going to survive. It's not going to be both of us. There's something wrong here. What was the diagnosis process like for you with the children?
Yeah.
And what have they been diagnosed with?
Yeah, so, and that's still evolving. so my lads are now nearly 15 and 12. And when I'm speaking to parents now that I'm meeting whose children are in their early years, I'm hearing in a good number of cases that things are improving and a lot more different to my experience. However, my experience was that I could feel and sense and see things that were not as they should be. I have an academic background where we learnt about neurological differences to a point. Like I knew what the generalized milestones were, and I was reading a lot, and I'm thinking, my guy doesn't fit this. And so I was hooked in with the child health nurse. I found her to be actually really helpful. She was quite matronly and quite old school. But as soon as she saw that I was not okay, she hooked me in with supports. And she made, so she was, yeah, helpful. I'd talk to family and they're just like, well, no, he's fine. I'm like, because I'd say, do you notice anything weird? Or do you notice anything odd? No, it's just, but then when you learn retrospectively that my whole family is neurodivergent, like I look at my mum and dad and like totally autistic, I look at me, my brother and sister and go totally autistic, ADHD. So when your family is neurodivergent and our struggles and challenges and quirks are all very normal for us, we don't see it typically in the kids. I think my eldest James's traits and challenges were really overt, like lots of behavior, lots of food, like gagging. I remember the gagging over having a cherry ripe because it had the coconut inside. Not doing the same, not playing the same way. So I set up a beautiful play space with lots of Montessori theory in mind. And it was just a whole lot of, let's just dump the toys, a lot of sensory, a lot of holes in walls, a lot of delay in generalized milestones, and going to the GP and having, oh, that's just what 3-year-olds do. I found for us, though, I suspected autism. We were referred to, actually the GP did say after a little while, I'm not concerned, but you are. And if you're concerned, this is what we can do. So I did appreciate that mindset.
We definitely need more of those doctors.
Yeah, and I think, he's retired now and potentially parents may be experiencing better situations, but to have a GP say, I'm not too worried, but if you are, and I think having that validated was good. The hard moment, I guess, for me was we went to the pediatric psychologist for screening. And I went in for the report day, the sharing of the findings. And I had thought there were autistic traits there. And I thought, I don't know if you do this or your listeners do this, but I was like anticipating and trying to, it's probably this. And I remember thinking, I reckon there's some traits, but I'm going to be told there's some traits, but not enough to formally diagnose this kid with anything. So let's just wait and see. I was absolutely floored when the results came out on the cusp between like moderately high and quite high. And that hit hard because I thought, I don't know what that means, like.
On one hand, this is how I felt.
Yeah.
You're totally devastated and you go through a grieving process of what their life's going to be, what you thought your life was going to be, etc. But on the other hand, I felt so validated that we were criticized for so much and it was all bad parenting and it was this and it was
Oh my
that.
gosh. Yeah.
Finally, I was validated that I was, and it's not that I was right, but that
No.
one thing I've really learned is you have to trust your gut.
Yeah,
Generally, the mother's intuition is always right.
yeah. Um, yeah, and then I feel fairly well supported throughout that process. I have a lot of anger that I need to work through from all the spaces that I was sent to that are designed for neurotypical childhood development and parenting. Course after course, try this, I'd read a parenting book, I'd put those things in place. It just made things worse. Went to this course, went to that course, won't name them, but I will, yeah. And because we are not a neurotypical family, those strategies either didn't make a dot of difference, caused a lot more stress on me because I'm trying to implement something that's not fit for purpose in our situation. But it's the best that we know at the time. And so I remember listening to an Atwood Garnett presentation on autism and PDA, pathological demand avoidance, and I'll get to that in a minute because that's part of our diagnosis story. And when Dr. Garnett says, these parents have been to Triple P, they've been to Circle of Security, they've been da-da-da-da-da, and they sit there and she said, these strategies do not work, they only make things worse. And I just, in that moment, just felt, like you said before, validated, like, oh, someone
Breathe.
hears me. And then I felt rage over the injustice of all the hoops and hurdles that I tried to push my kid through and I tried to push myself through that were just not right for us. And when I meet younger parents who are on the process journey of having that early childhood diagnosis, and I hear them speak in terms of, our family doesn't do that. We do it this way. That's not going to work for that. And they're already amazing self-advocates for themselves, their children and their family. I just stop them and go, you are so many years ahead of where I was when my little guy was 3. And I just, so yeah, I have to work through I need to find some avenues and spaces now for working through some of that, what I'm going to call, trauma, because as a parent, I'd be listening to the radio and some cheery little voice would come on the radio and tell me if I just make my lunchboxes more interesting, then my child will eat his lunch and eat a rainbow. And I'm like, my kid eats Cruskets with LD cookies, Delta creams, rice crackers,
And that's it.
and that's it. And the calamari specifically from Graham's at Wellington Point. And he'll have orange juice and a few other things and plain chocolate. And it's like, I'm that person you see at Woolies or Coles or Aldi, wherever. If our food is on special, we've got a, like, we don't just take a box, we take the box.
And you have to.
So you hear all these messages around screen time or diet or behavior management or sleep routines. And it's like, yep, for a neurotypical person in a neurotypical family. But there has to be a space where parents like me go, and I'm getting stronger with this. It took me a while through James, I don't even know when it clicked, but my phrase is unconventional. We are an unconventional family doing family life unconventionally because that's what we need. And I'm not even sorry.
You should never be sorry.
No. Yeah. Yeah. So
Jen has a saying that she uses all the time. Perfectly imperfect.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Is that right, Jen?
That's exactly
Perfectly
right.
imperfect.
Yeah.
And that's what we are.
Mm.
And there's nothing wrong with that. How did you find the diagnosis process for your second son compared to your first son?
Yeah, so I was a lot more on it. Like I was a lot stronger in it. His So both boys are autistic. My eldest boy, he has a very overt profile. He's at the moment diagnosed ASD2, ADHD, globalized anxiety, PDA, which is not a diagnosis, but certainly when I heard and learned about PDA, my whole world made sense. And we're looking at an AFRID diagnosis as well. We're just hooking in with the right specialists and right team there. My youngest son, who went to kindy with your little guy, Kate and I would be the last two mums there because her little fellow would be asleep. And then we both did another year at kindy. So that was really neat because I think we just sort of looked at each other and I don't know, I got the feeling like you were like, yeah. And I was like,
got it. It was like that kindred spirit. Like, I know what you're going through. It's the unspoken word.
yeah. It's just I see you. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
But and our little guys became sweet little friends. And so I remember talking to the kindy teacher, and so Andrew's traits were a lot more subtle. And I didn't know what were things that he had learnt from his brother. And at the time, because of the way James's brain and body worked, our house was absolutely controlled by him and it was absolutely chaotic. It's still very much dominated by his needs and personality. So I'd watch things and go, am I just being overly, like, because the first one's autistic, the second one might be too, must be too. So I remember talking to the kindy teacher who had taught James as well, and he was like, So we did take a bit more of a wait and see approach with Andrew. So for me, diagnosis is important in terms of understanding and accessing supports. And if there's something going on, and the person it's not impacting their functionality or their well-being, then I think it's okay to take a little bit more of a wait and see approach. When Andrew's ASD traits started to really impact his ability to function and cope, or became a little bit more noticeable, that's when I pursued that process of diagnosis. We did go through a different practitioner. While James's paediatric psychologist did a great job in writing the report and doing the assessment, I didn't want to go back to her because at the point of her going through the report and saying, and if she ever watches this, I won't name you, I appreciate all the support that you gave us. This was a clincher for me that made me not go back. She got to the point where she's saying, moderately high autistic traits, and the tears started. I grabbed a tissue box.
Aww.
Goes, I hate this part. Just took the tissue and went. So anyway, so I thought she's not our people, that's another important point I would make for families is, like you said before, Kate, trust your gut with your kids, but also trust your gut with the team that you get around you. If you don't feel safe, you don't feel validated, heard, seen, connect with, understood, if you can move on, because they're just not your people.
I like to call them our tribe.
Yeah.
And they will, I'll go to them with absolutely anything and know that they've got my child's best interests at heart.
Yeah. And family-centered. There's a big movement in understanding the importance of supporting the whole family. So when I meet practitioners and allied health professionals who are, how are you? Because we're so focused around getting supports for our kids and what our kids are doing and where we're booking them into. It undoes me a little bit when the OT comes and sits beside me in the waiting room as they're doing the handover and says, how are you going? Or just as you did this morning, Kate, and just go, you know, are you okay? You just seem a bit flat today. And I think, well, they're the people who are not just about the job or getting a task done. They're the people who are in it with you, and that's really important. So we change supports for Andrew. His diagnosis process was a little bit different, but still we had a positive outcome with both, and our paediatrician signed off without any dramas on both. My nephew sees the same paediatrician and hasn't had that diagnosis signed off, and I'm very aware that when a disability is invisible, when it's a neurological divergent, social emotional disability difference going on, it's invisible. And my nephew will present, he thrives in a one-on-one adult environment. He's like, I'll chat, I'll look you in the face, I'll have a joke. And the paediatrician will just say to my sister-in-law, I don't see it. And yet I look at this other little guy and I'm like, read his report cards, I'm reading reports from speeches and whatever. I'm just like, he is so autistic. He just, so I do appreciate that the journey that for diagnosis can be difficult, particularly if our kids are super fantastic. And
especially when they're so good at masking.
Yeah. And it takes someone really clever and skilled.
Absolutely.
I think that just cycles back again to an essential element in care around families is listening and hearing the parent.
And it's funny you've come back to that, because I did want to bring that up with you. And whilst this isn't about NDIS or anything else, I think one place where the NDIS falls down so terribly, but I understand it, is that the plan is written for the individual. And I get that, you know, the individual needs absolutely the OT, the speech, the psych, everything else. But it really does fall down when there's not that support for the family or for the carers.
Yeah.
And when you're then criticised for making things work for your family. Because I know certainly from my experience, my kids don't want anyone else to help them. They only want me.
Exactly.
But that's fine. I'm happy to do that role, but I need help with all my other roles to be able to spend that one-on-one time with them. Because as you said, these kids thrive one-on-one. And that's where I struggle a little bit, because to me, then it comes down to money.
And it's the same in the classroom, particularly as students get older. And I think the supports that our kids, then teens, then young adults, then adults need have to, whether it's NDIS or like in the education space with the NCCD, it looks at individual need, but it has to reflect the individual context and the individual person. So a kid in prep in grade 1 might not mind that a teacher aide comes to take them out or sits with them in the classroom, but when that same support is given to a kid in year 5 and year 6, and they don't want to look different to their peers, and they don't want to be withdrawn, and the school is still putting supports in place that are not evidence-based and not individually reflective of that person, they're actually not helpful. So we have engaged with the NDIA for both James and Andrew. Andrew eats up his funding. Nom, 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 nom. He's like, yeah, I'll go to speech. Yeah, I'll go to OT. Love it, love it, love it. Psychology, sure. I'll have a support worker. Yeah. James, that's like his shark music. And it's like, no one can help him but me. And I know that moving forward into the future, he's now on his way to 15. There needs to be some shift into allowing other safe people into our family. At the moment, it's my mum and me, really, a family friend, and sometimes my sister when she's available. And it's like he's got a fairly healthy, in my mind, enough package, but it's earmarked for stuff that's not useful. Yeah, for him. And I understand it's the system we're with. And when we look internationally, I think we're doing okay. And in terms of supports for individuals with needs, yet I hope it gets to a place where it can come back to being a lot more family centric and take on that evidence-based therapeutic framework of it's not just the individual, it's actually the whole family that needs the support.
What does your boy's education look like now?
Oh, okay. So we learn at home. It's both boys burnt out differently. So for James, it was a complete body brain burnout, exhaustion. He wants to go to school. He went to school up until I'd say year 5. We were doing okay, and then the school he was at was prep to 12, so year 6 moves to the middle school with the mindset of let's get them ready for middle school. But that was just too much. Too many adults, too much movement, just too many demands on his executive function skills. And he wanted to go, I think he went 18 days in a year. So I remember because he wanted to go, we left him there for year 6 and tried to support him in that. And he would go for a day, and then it would take him about 2 weeks to recover to be able to go back again. And in that time, the classes have moved on, the learning's moved on. And so he'd go back to front it again and just be so far behind that. So in the end, I had to say, we can't continue with this. Because it was just in this limbo of every day. The plan was he would go to school. So my work, I was working part-time. The family was all structured around the fact that there's kids going out of the house every day. And then every day we'd have this horrible morning of just trying to get him, the anxiety for him and me trying to get out the door. Some days he'd just pull the sheet over his head and go, I can't. And then other days he'd get to the door in his uniform and just go, I can't. Other days I'd drop him to school and I'd watch him walk in. But most days we got to about 10 o'clock and I'd call it the time of death. It'd be like calling it, it's 10 o'clock, we're not going to school today. So he's on the other side of burnout recovery from school part. So I've been learning a little bit, not enough yet, but a little bit around school part. And I did have a quick look on, I think it's the School Part Australian website. There's stages. It's like you're in the burnout and you're in the recovery, and then it's like you emerge from the recovery and then there's this new normal. So his goal is to go back to school. So I have a home education plan with HEU Queensland, which is pretty intense for him to be able to go back to school, and most days it doesn't happen. So his sleep is so dynamic. So at the moment he'll be going to sleep soon and sleeping through the day, and it will just cycle. So then we'll have a season where he's up during the day and asleep at night. For the younger guy, he was happy to go to school as long as he could be in the learning support room with 0 academic demands placed on him. So he went for the social stuff. And as soon as a teacher or support teacher would come near him with anything that looked like anything academic or book work, he would just say, no, thank you. And he'd go outside and stim. It was a hard conversation to have with my husband, because I'm like, I think we need to take Andrew out of school and let him learn at home. And my husband was like, but he needs to learn. I'm like, well, he's going to school, but he's not learning. So, yeah, it's been quite different for us to take that step. It's not a pathway that I would have chosen as an option 1, but it's where we're at. So,
and is it working for you?
There's no other option, Kate.
Yeah.
There is no other option for my family. So I've seen both boys recover. Both boys are learning in their own way, in their own interests, and I'm starting to get Andrew back into doing some online learning. So online programs that are short, and get him in, gets it done, he moves on with his day. And I also have always advocated and considered that therapy is learning. So just jumping back to when they were at school, if we had to go to OT, or not have to, we went to OT, we went to psychology, we went to speech. For James, that would be his learning day because he would be burnt out. Therapy is hard. Like they're working in their weak areas, doing something that's really hard. Be like us going to the gym, and which is not my thing.
Yeah.
And doing the hard stuff, and then going and doing more hard stuff after that, like going and mowing and doing hard yakka in the yard or something. And I know that therapists they work really hard to make therapy engaging and interest-based, and it can look like fun, but our little ones or big ones are actually tapping into their weaknesses, and they're exercising the weaker parts. And it's hard yakka, and then we send them back to school to do more hard yakka after they've done that. So
I really love how you've described that because I've never thought about it that way. They're doing things that are non-preferred, which are then 10 times harder than going. So they are actually working harder than the everyday population.
They're learning new skills. They're practicing weaker skills. And so in my mindset, during our week, allied health therapy, even though I know NDIA don't fund education, we don't go for educational purposes, but it supports the foundational underlying skills that the kids need to access learning. So it's like if we're going to speech and we're going to OT and we're going to counselling or psychology, physiotherapy, whatever the kids are doing, exercise stuff, they're developing skills that they need to access learning. So yesterday, Andrew went to counselling. Fortnightly, he does speech. So on those days, that's part of his learning day. So we'll do a little bit of maths and something in the morning. He has his speech therapy session. I'm like, we're done for the day. He's worked on stuff that was hard.
Is there a lot of involvement from you in terms of the online learning or the distance education? Do you sort of have to manage it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a lot involved in convincing my kids to come and do it. For James, I just say, you're the one who wants to go back to school. Like, I don't, because of I think the PDA profile, it has to be on him. They'll say, here are all the resources you need. I'm here when you need me. I'll offer invitations. Hey, I've got a free couple of hours around. Let me know if it's time. But Andrew, it's a bit of a different approach. Sometimes I'll be in my room doing some work or tidying. I'll hover. Sometimes I'm right beside. Usually Andrew will push me away. James wants me right there with him. It's tough too because we're in this space where James wants to learn. His ADHD is atrociously disruptive for him, but because of his AFRED, his food intolerance, food sensitivity, food anxiety, body image stuff, he's underweight. So we can't start a stimulant medication that will inhibit his appetite while he's underweight and needs those. So it's like his brain needs support. And is it appropriate or fair for me to push too much when he's unsupported? So I'm just navigating that space at the moment. Certainly feeling a lot of frustration because I've pushed, like many parents, our whole world changes. And so and it's in part what we do, but I don't do it easily. Some families may not be in the position where one parent can give up, but there are a lot of families across Australia where one parent has had to give up work to be a support, even if their kids are in school. It just takes so much more work to get them there. They need a lot more support after school. They might get called during the day to come get them or provide support. So some parents just have to work, and that's just the way it is. Many families are doing without because one parent has, not through their choice, has had to leave work. And that injustice really, I get quite righteously angry about that one.
And Deb, who's your greatest support through this journey? Because
Oh my God.
you're the pillar of your family and the strength for your boys. Who supports you? Who do you turn to?
Good question. I do have a really close friend I lean in on. Being autistic, so I'm like I was diagnosed last year with autism, and the year before with ADHD, which just makes so much sense. And I've got good psychiatric support around that to help me understand that. But in that, being very introverted, being shut down when I'm overwhelmed, it's actually quite difficult to lean on other people.
Yeah.
So I have a really close friend who's completely opposite and extroverted and needs to check in on me. And when I'm exhausted, overwhelmed, and need to process stuff, I need to cocoon, and it appears like I'm pushing her away, and that's tough, and that's just part of my neurodivergence too. So
does that sound familiar, Jen?
100%, Kate. I find that I can read Kate like a book these days. I'm like, yep.
And that is what is so lovely, is that she knows that I'm not being rude.
No.
I'm not being dismissive. I'm not being, and she just, it is what it is. And she's there and she picks up the pieces, and the support is just phenomenal.
She's we call each other Bezies. It's super cute. And she's got little ones, and them coming over so my husband Andrew and I and James are completely introverted. So the less people we have in our lives, the happier. So we have Christy come over with her 3 little ones who are big and noisy and brash, and James loves it.
Yeah.
He comes out of his room. He is like the big dorky older cousin, throws them in the pool.
He thrives on the innocence, and to be honest, he probably thrives on the non-judgment. These 3 little kids just adore him for him, and he doesn't have to pretend to be anyone else. So
they're planning. We're looking at getting those world passes for one of the SeaWorld and Warner Brothers, because he loves going fast and I hate it. So Christy and her kids have passes and they're daredevils, and he can go and make himself sick on stupid rides that I would just be so anxious about knowing that he's going on. And that's super great. So my parents are awesome supports. My sister is it. And I do have good friends who get it, but we're all just in our own families, just surviving, aren't we?
Just busy.
Like, I know Kate's literally just up the road, and I know that she'd be like, if you're struggling, call me, and I'd be totally the same. And yet, just in the day in, day out, it's bedtime before you know it.
And just get busy doing life in general. Yeah.
I'm trying to slow that down. So this year my word is intentional, being intentional. So what do I intentionally have space for in all that means? Because one thing that hits hard for me and is really sobering for me is I've just been doing some research around motherhood and autism. So being an autistic person, being a mum, raising autistic kids. And I'm trying to write a summary around some of the information that I've read that's come out of England last year. People starting to do research around the experience of autistic women having kids. And my summary would be, parenting is hard. Parenting a child with special needs, and in my lens, autism is harder. Being an autistic mum, raising autistic kids is harder again. And everyone in life has their hard. We all have our stories, we all have our experiences, and I don't want to undervalue or devalue anyone else's experience. It's just, this is my world with my lens, with my specific focus. And what upsets me is how, as parents, more often than not, I know that there's exceptions always, more often than not, we've had these little people since they were teeny tiny. We've been their first educator. We've watched them grow and develop. We know how they sigh, how they breathe when something's not quite right. And then we go into spaces to advocate for them, and our voices are not as weighty or as valuable as a allied health professional's report or a teacher's report. And I think that needs to change. As you know, I completed my master's until the end of 2023, and in education, special and inclusive ed. And each of the subjects I used as an opportunity to not only refine my education understanding, but to know more about inclusion and know more specifically around the inclusion of autistic kids. And as I would work through every subject, it just, the literature coming out just backs up everything that we've said today. Absolutely everything. It's not anecdotal. It is so heavily supported by international and Australian academic literature around education. That's my space. What floored me, absolutely gutted me, I did a small project with 4 mums from around Greater Brisbane who had a child or children with autism accessing education. And my question for my research project was simply, what's their experience going into a learning support meeting?
Yeah.
And access supports for their children or child. It just happened that the 4 mums who nominated themselves and were participants in this very small project were all tertiary educated women who all had careers in educational allied health. So there was a speech pathologist who worked in Queensland schools. There was a social worker who worked in youth justice. There was a physiotherapist who worked in rehabilitation, people with disability. And there was a high school teacher who was studying psychology because she couldn't teach full-time around her kids' needs. So she had to do a pivot with her career. I spoke to each of these women who understood disability, knew their kids, were professional and competent and articulate in their workspaces and how they conducted themselves in interviews with me. And each one of them, when they went into an advocacy situation in a school, and I guess you could extrapolate that then into like going to a GP, going to the NDIS, going to a paediatrician to advocate for a diagnosis, they felt small. They felt undervalued. They felt their words didn't matter.
Worthless.
They felt that they weren't really there to be consulted or to have much of an input. And one of the participants, the speech therapist who works in some, does some work through, I guess, Queensland, it really hit hard when she said, you know, I can write a report as a speech pathologist making recommendations, and that has some weight around what happens and the direction of things that happen in schools for these kids. But when I go into my own kids' meeting, I'm just a mum. I'm just a mum, and they felt disempowered. They experienced intimidation, where many professionals would be in the room and they would be the parent in the room. They weren't given choice or options, or they weren't offered the time to have things explained well.
They weren't part of the discussion.
It was not collaborative at all. And there's lots I can say about that, but the point I wanted to make was it really sobered me. It really hit to the heart and mind of what we do and what I want to do in my workspace and in my study, was for articulate, professional, educated women felt small, undervalued and disempowered. What's going on for women, men, parents, grandparents, kin, carers, who go into those spaces who don't understand the education system, that don't understand the disability sector, don't understand NCCD, don't understand the lingo, may be new to Australia, may have English as a second language, may be Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander person, may themselves be neurodivergent or have a disability. And I just think, how do we support parents and families of kids with disability or additional needs are doing it tough, and we're vulnerable. We need good support. We need the right supports. And how do we advocate in spaces to make things safer for everybody? And when we have legislation and law and policy, and I'm specifically in education is my field of speciality, that is just ignored. It doesn't have teeth. It's the Disability Royal Commission said our laws are not strong enough around the human rights for people with disability, and specifically in the education space. And it's there is a review coming up. The Disability Standards for Education gets reviewed every 5 years, and parents can participate in a survey to give some feedback. And my question is, what's the point? What's the point of having law and legislation and disability standards legislation for education when it doesn't matter? And so that's why I'm in the advocacy space, around just asking those questions and saying, no, the law is this. And I think being autistic, I understand this now, I'm rules-based, I get hugely knocked around when injustice happens. Like it's not just a head thing, it's like my whole body, mind and heart.
Yeah.
I'm doing some work at the moment to learn how to not do it, because it's not sustainable. But
please pass it on, because I totally understand.
Yeah, so that's my space.
I think that's actually a really beautiful way to end the podcast, leaving questions for people to actually think about. It's been so lovely talking to you, Deb, and I thank you for being so raw and honest and sharing, your life story with your kids. There's so much more we could have delved into. Unfortunately, we've only got an hour, so we might have to do another. But thank you so much for joining us, and we will put all your details there so that people can connect with you
Lovely.
After they've heard the podcast.
Thanks, Kate. Enjoy your day. Thanks for doing what you're doing.
Thanks.